Hi, welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter, and today I am super pleased and excited to be joined by Lynn Harris. Hi, Lynn, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Good to be here.
So maybe
Thanks.
before we kind of talk about these quite heavy topics that we've got planned, you can tell me a little bit about yourself, Lynn, please.
Yeah, certainly. I deliver the abuse education to men and women, and actually teenagers. I do that through various organisations and also through online, through a social enterprise that I run, and also two limited companies as well, just to give it to people in various parts of the world in different ways that they want it. And so it's abuse education and recovery programs for men and women who are affected by abuse, either by being a victim and or a perpetrator of abuse. Um, I'll give you a bit of background. Is that okay,
Yes,
Jane?
please. Yep.
Yeah. So my background, the reason I do this today, and it's my passion, is to educate and help people recover, is because I am a childhood survivor of domestic abuse in the family, where my father was abusing my mother as far back as I could remember in my childhood. For myself and my sister, who's 6 years younger than me, that was our childhood. That was a daily sort of navigation, I could say, of what normal life should have been. For us, it was like an assault course,
Oh,
of not
goodness.
knowing what was coming really. So it was multiple, what I know now to be trauma.
Mm.
Um, we were really affected. And so after I was 14 at the time, so that was about 17 years into my mother and my father's relationship, my mother decided that she wanted out of the relationship. She'd got some time to herself whilst dad was offshore at the time working. And we had gotten a little bit of a respite when he was offshore and realised that we could have a normal life. And it was really lovely without him. And so mum set about ending the relationship, and she had to get the law involved and also, an interdict with a lawyer. And so dad would not accept this. He
Okay.
knew that it was serious this time. The 2 week period of mum breaking up, dad followed through in a threat that he did many, many years, and he murdered her in front of myself and my sister. And
Oh,
that was in 1983 that he did that. And that was about 39 years ago, actually,
oh,
next
sorry,
week.
Lynn. I mean, I, it must be hard, even with all this distance, just speaking it, acknowledging
Yeah,
that that was something that you experienced, that loss, that daily violence, and that ultimate horrendous loss of both parents.
thank you. Yes, yeah, yeah. It's to describe it, it's like a nightmare, your worst nightmare, thinking back, and people wonder how others can survive and get through that. But as a child, we've got an incredible ability and capacity in our brains to be able to shut something down
Mm.
and then focus and function on a daily basis in other areas of our life. And so thankfully, we had a supportive mum's family who took myself and my sister in and fostered us. And they're a very quiet, hardworking class family that did their best,
Yeah.
and just got us settled as much as possible. But no one knew what we were suffering,
No.
no one knew.
No, and those were different times. I mean, I think people still, in many cases, would not know how to respond really, but there might be more of an awareness of the need for bereavement counselling, maybe aside from the
Yeah,
complex trauma counselling or anything else. But yeah, thank goodness
yeah,
for those family members who were able to step in and
yeah,
provide some safety after that. So Lynn, then,
yeah.
given that experience of child violence. And did you also experience some adult violence as well, or did I misunderstand that?
Um, yeah, so Dad basically started to beat me up as a teenager as well, and that's where Mum said, "Oh gosh, he's actually transferring now his anger and his in his mind his acceptable violence towards me, her daughter, at the age where it started with her and him when they
Okay.
were going out with each other at age 14." So that was something that was it escalated from just a smack to real violence and stuff, the level at which he beat my mum up. And so as I grew up, and my sister's similar to me, our adult relationships have been, we have been attracted to those who were of the same kind of self-esteem and looked at themselves the same way as we thought of ourselves.
Okay.
We sort of reflected what we thought about ourselves in that relationship with others. It wasn't so much violence, it was more sort of verbal, emotional, psychological. It was different types of abuses that I didn't recognise,
Okay.
because at that point in my life, I thought the only abuse was physical. So there was
Okay.
lots of verbal, psychological, coercive, all that kind of thing that was going on. And not even in intimate partner relationships. We were receiving this in friendship. Some
Okay.
family members, work colleagues, institutions, different organisations, different walks of life and settings in our life that we were in. We were experiencing this. It was like we had a label on our head
So
that said,
interesting.
"Come and abuse us some more," you know?
Yeah, it's shocking, and I think people don't always realize their own capacity to become an abuser either, that
Yeah,
if they're not very aware of relational dynamics and the fact that actually trauma is widespread, they can
yeah,
be pulled into scenarios, or they can be activated by characteristics in people and behave in ways
absolutely.
that are not in alignment with their values, maybe.
Yes, yes.
So that's a
That's
very
definitely our
interesting point
experience.
about the colleagues
Yeah.
as well. And so then, given that early life experience, the horrendous loss in your teenage years, and these relational patterns that you found yourself in and people reenacting with you, what is your own understanding, Lynn, of the importance of attachment in early childhood and the quality of that and the safety that we experience or not in our early years, and how that can have an impact on how we progress in life?
Yeah, definitely. I even see it in the reflection of my three beautiful grandsons right now, that how important that attachment is. And I can look and see certainly that was very fractioned, for us.
Mm-hmm.
It was in fits and bouts, and I fortunately was taken in. My mum and dad had me at age 17 here in Glasgow, and I fortunately was taken in by my grandparents until I was 3 years of age,
Oh, okay.
who were a very loving, normal, ordinary couple. So I had that with them. So you could say, well, okay, grandparents might have saved Lynn from the day to day, but I was still very much affected. And also, I was affected by them being affected
Mm.
by my mum and dad, because all my family tried to do was try and make my mum see sense that she deserved much better than this guy who was behaving in this way. And so I felt the pain and the trauma from them. And then at age 3, my grandfather says, "Right, we must give Lynn back to her parents, because they are now responsible for this child, and it might make them grow up." So I
Okay.
remember my first traumatic experience at age 3 was a tug of war between my
Wow.
mum and my grandmother. My grandmother didn't
Okay.
want to let me go. And so that was my first real trauma experience. But I could feel a grief.
Yes.
I think back now, looking back, there was a grief, even just seeing the pain and the sadness around my mum and dad whilst I was in um, a very loving, nurturing environment with my grandfather
Yeah.
and grandmother.
Wow.
So that's really a revelation for me to to look at all that now in the reflection of the information that's out there now about trauma. It's
Yeah.
freeing for me. It's freeing for me to
Yeah.
see it for what it is.
It's fascinating, all right, because they became your attachment figures, really. They were providing
Yeah,
the everyday care and security and love and attention
yeah.
to your needs. Do you recall having any like physiological symptoms like, I don't know, rashes, or did you get sick after you were returned? I'm just wondering, or did you hear anything about that adjustment period?
I think, yes, there was bedwetting, was certainly one of them. Very, very, up until I was age 9.
Okay.
And that's a sign from the effects of domestic abuse, very much so.
Yeah.
Bedwetting, fear, very. I remember actually some of my own physiological effects, and that
Yeah.
was very high alert,
Okay. How could you
very
not
high
be?
alert. Yes, yeah, and fearful. Um, Smells, my senses were heightened.
Mm,
So I can think back immediately and remember smells around that time
right.
and different feelings and colours
Mm,
and lots of vivid memories and
mm,
dreams. And they're very much connected to me now today as I've been diagnosed with PTSD. Um, I haven't been diagnosed with complex, but I'm sure I do have that too.
yeah.
I certainly look at the list of complex and I think, well, that's definitely me. But yeah, so I can sense, I remember my own physiological, but it was definitely bedwetting and high alert and
Mm,
probably some behaviour
yeah,
issues as well. Not
sure.
really a lot of bad behaviour issues, but I'm sure they were there too.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I was just wondering, given that literally not even the domestic violence and the symptoms associated with that, but just the return to your birth parents from the grandparents, whether
Yes.
that might have
Oh, I've just
caused.
remembered one, Jane.
Mm,
I've just remembered one. You know how the brain just opens
mm,
up all of a sudden? Shyness,
okay.
acute, acute shyness. So you can see it in all of my pictures around that time. I could not lift my chin from my chest and
Oh,
my eyes were wide. I was just so shy, so shy in the world. So it kind of went in the way a little bit. And that was my
yeah.
behaviour issues as well,
Wow.
one or
And
the other.
again, very understandable given that your safety and security was tugged away from you,
Yeah.
and all of that, and then into the fire, I guess, of the domestic violence and abuse. So then, Lynn, from your own personal experience, but also your wealth of professional experience now working with victims and perpetrators, is trauma often at the root of violence, do you think?
I really do believe it. I believe it 100%,
Okay.
even more. Yeah, I believe in learned behaviour. Um, I know that there's some clinical issues with people's brains and they've maybe never been exposed to violence,
Mm,
and maybe there's a brain default or something that's there, and they've never been exposed to it, and then there's something maybe that's clinical,
mm,
that's a chemical imbalance
mm.
perhaps in the brain. So I don't profess to know every case, and so
Sure.
I do believe that that's definitely the case. But I really do believe where it's a behavioural issue, it's from learned behaviour, or it comes from a trauma and then develops into perhaps violent behaviour from that trauma that's been unresolved. And that person maybe gets stuck. When I've
Yeah.
heard of all of this and I've read about it all and working with people, talking to people, hearing their stories over the last years, they become stuck,
Yes.
and that can then create that frustration, and then from there comes violent outbursts and different things that can happen, and also mixed with a belief system that's been developed through learned behavior, through environmental, and also looking at society as a whole and the messages that come through society and through dysfunctional families, the whole kind of melting pot of, you know, society and also your environment and your kind of learned, your upbringing, you know, as well.
Sure.
I believe it's all mixed in.
And with your own father, did he have an experience or multiple experiences of violence within his childhood himself? Do you know?
He did. He did. I knew some of it as a child, and of course, as an adult, he wasn't in my life. But the unusual thing happened. It was a very, for me, for my journey, I went into church. I became a church member, and I went with my children at one point years ago. I wanted to know. I wasn't brought up in the church. Sort of family, there was nothing like that, no background. So I decided to look at something that looked peaceful because I was desperate for peace in
Sure.
my heart and in my life. And
Yeah.
I went towards something that looked as if it could give me some solace from all of that. And as I did investigate this way of life and you know, everything that came with looking at Christianity and faith, I did experience a lot of great things. And one of them was looking at forgiveness and
Okay.
looking at letting go what others have done. Of course, the biggest thing was the thing that my dad did. And so I went
Yes.
on a journey, and it must have been about 10 to 15 years of looking at what my dad did till I came to the point where I really believed I was receiving some sort of healing from it because I was starting to understand that he was, you know, a product of his own demons, his own background, his own, and I knew some of it, but I didn't know the full extent until he died. Now, just before he died, myself and my sister felt really compelled to go and find him
Okay.
and to have a sort of a supported and risk assessed relationship with him. He was in Aberdeen, we were in Glasgow by this time, he was in Aberdeen. And for a year and a half, we had this safe relationship where we
Wow.
reconnected, we reconciled, and myself and my sister acted out our forgiveness of him
Wow.
because we realised we couldn't carry this on in our lives any longer, that the resentment was killing us.
Yes.
So when my dad, his cancer came back and he died a year and a half later. And after he died, his family came forward and his sister came forward, she's 2 years older. And she told me the extent of my father's abuse, which was sexual abuse all the way back from age 3
Oh
to then
God.
getting put into a boys' home at 10. When he started, his trauma started to manifest in him at age 10. He was put into a boys' home at age 10 and he was systematically abused by paedophiles there.
Oh God. I'm
And
so
then
sorry. It's horrific.
it's just multiple, yeah. And
Yeah.
he was then in Borstals and crimes, killing animals by the time he was 14 and meeting my
Mm.
mother at that age. He was very violent. He was like a time bomb. He was like a
Mm.
walk-in bomb that would just go off. Yeah.
Yes. And he obviously had huge reasons for rage, you know, given what he'd experienced.
Yeah.
So like he might have had empathy issues and he misplaced his rage at what happened to him, to your poor mother and to you and the rest
Yeah.
of the family. Um, and did he get any help or, you know, healing when he was in prison, do you think, Lynn? Did he get any services that he needed in order to come to terms with everything that happened and everything he did?
Yeah. Nothing.
Nothing.
As far as I know, nothing. And I remember as a child being really confused by watching him struggle and suffer and fight his his memories, his demons, his guilt, his shame, and everything that I now know. I have a name for all of that
Mm.
now to understand. He even went to the GP, I remember a few times, and he was asking for help. And the
Okay.
GP says, no, I can't help you. There's nothing we can do to help you. And so
Okay.
he was desperate for help. He wanted to change, but he didn't know how.
Mm.
Yeah. So
which I guess is quite common, and it brings
yeah.
us nicely on to your life's work now, really. So on your website, I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it nofeart.com?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Here in Glasgow, we say we're no fear. We're no
No fear,
fear.
no fear. Okay, lovely. And so you guys observe that we realized through years of working with women that to make a bigger impact, we needed to focus on men, and that effective services were lacking for men. So how do you approach working with male perpetrators of abuse, Lynn?
So my first time I set up No Fear, it was always for women and men. I wanted men to come forward. At that time, I'd been working in the community through the church. I became a church leader. I did a diploma in church leadership, spiritual leadership, and that gave me a great understanding of working in the community and working on projects and setting up teams and the do's and the don'ts of leadership and stuff like that. So I was quite confident in that. And I'd been working through some what they call social action ministries, and already been sort of reaching men who were coming into a centre that the church owned, and that centre gave out, the need to the community, which was a food bank and a listening ear and signposting and kind of homeless support and everything. So by then I was already chatting, talking to men, and I had offered some information about the course that I was running at the time. The course I was running at the time was more about, like the dominator was a man, I've quickly learned just over lockdown that there was a bit of political affiliation with that particular course, saying that all men are the problem.
Mm,
And I've realised to unpick all that from my life now,
yeah,
because
it's more
it's a little bit of
complicated than that.
exactly. And so at that time, I was just giving bits of information to men to say, if your abuser was ever a woman at the point in your life when you were a child, or you can change this character in this book or in this information. And any time that the guys were looking at it, they immediately were attracted to the information, and saying that it was information they should have got at school as boys,
Wow.
throughout their different parts of their life, that no one had ever told them or taught them about behaviour. They didn't have a name for it. So it was great to get that feedback from men. At the time, I was more kind of setting up groups for women. Women were coming along more engaging, easier. But I found with men it was quite different and difficult. But then lockdown came,
Mm.
and then I think I was one of the first domestic abuse organisations in the UK to get online, because I just wanted to connect with the women I was already connecting with, and they were already isolated.
Mm.
So very quickly, I had four devices going at the one time. Whatever the women could come in, they come in on Facebook Live, or I got them live on one
Wow.
phone,
Yeah.
Facebook Live on the other, and then Zoom on the computer, and I had all these devices facing at me. And all I just did was just deliver that session for that week to continue their recovery. And the owner of the program that I run, she was a probation officer and had worked with perpetrators when they came out of prison. And she already ran a 2-day course for perpetrators all around the UK. And she said, let's get the guys on Zoom. Well, I was a bit frightened. I didn't know how it was all going to work.
Mm.
But she really helped me to get the confidence in how to navigate that, how to engage everyone, and just really sort of be safe and put,
Yes.
regulations out there and guidelines for them, just to listen, take it in, and to feedback when they're asked to, and all that kind of thing.
Mm.
So August 2020, we had about 30 guys on a Zoom call in lockdown doing this programme for perpetrators. And very, very quickly, the courts and the social work departments in the UK were all referring up to me from the High Court in London and wherever else, saying, we've heard you're the only organisation that's doing something at the moment with men.
Amazing, Lynn.
So that was just great to hear, and such a privilege. And also, as I was working with them, A lot of them were on building sites. They were um, all from all different backgrounds. Some had self-referred, some hadn't been picked up by the courts, or they hadn't been convicted or even charged. They just heard there was a programme and wanted change for their partner.
That is fascinating. And I imagine that must be very common, because there is the cycle of abuse and the kind of the wooing and the apologies and the shame. I'm sure there's very few people who could not feel shame and self-blame for
Yeah.
what they're doing, particularly if they saw it as children and they know they're replicating that, and they might have kids who are witnessing it. And even just for the woman themselves, what did they
Yeah.
do to deserve this? So, and tell me then, like with the men, do they all have their cameras on, or could they have cameras off depending on what they were comfortable with, or did you have some ground rules that way?
I asked for cameras to be on, certainly, and I asked for them to feed back.
Okay.
It was important that they fed back, and they relaxed when they heard that they didn't have to talk about their own personal experiences.
Okay.
What we would do is just talk about the behaviour.
Okay.
So it would just be a case of, let's talk about the behaviour, let's talk about the abuser and what the abuser does. Let's just discuss that particular behaviour. If there's anything that's been of interest to you about the tactics of that particular behaviour, so if we spoke about violence, if we spoke about the bullying and intimidation using the body, if we talked about the psychological abuse using the mind, there was lots of discussions around, wow, I didn't actually realize. And then some just would say, I do that. I actually do that. I didn't know that was wrong, or I knew it was wrong, but didn't know how to stop. So then we always end up with, okay, what's the impact on victims for this particular behaviour, so that they can step into the victim's shoes, and then they can find out, how it feels to be that victim. And then we always end the session with, what's the opposite behaviour of that particular behaviour? What should we expect? And it's not that difficult, so they can see, actually, I don't need a brain transplant or anything here. All I just need to do is know what the behaviour is, so that I can challenge myself, and constructively criticise my own self, and then know where it's coming from, whether it's my environment, and then also know the opposite behaviour, and understand the impact it would have on my partner as well. So that's why you've got to go through all these components with them.
Yeah.
So that they really go on a journey with it.
And I can see how the distancing the self from the behavior would be effective, because we can like to make things simple and kind of describe people just as a violent man, or, an emotionally abusive man, which could all be true, but there are also other things. They might also be really intelligent and really charming and sometimes kind. So it isn't a reflection of the whole self. So that is a good way in, that makes maybe take some of the defenses down, I imagine.
Yeah, we do adopt an atmosphere of inclusivity, and it's a case of, look, you're here as a person. Let's look and see where this possibly could have came from in your life. We certainly do not collude with anyone to say this is acceptable or excusable. We say, let's go and see where this possibly could have came from, and let's see the opposite and how easy it can be if you understand the impact it has. And also, we're not looking for a perfect human being. None of us are perfect. There's a difference between fault or out and outright abuse. You're deliberately using power and control over someone. It's about power and control is different from just having a fault. If we've got a fault, we have a bad day and we snap and we say, okay, I'm sorry. And if something becomes a habit, then it's looking like it's power and control. And the second course that I've written, it's all about going a bit deeper with the information from the first course, where we know, okay, these are the behaviours, this is the name, this is why, this is, the environment, this is the opposite behaviour. But let's now look at what our day-to-day interactions with everyone in our lives with regards to power and control. Actually, we're powerless. over
Yeah.
other people, places, and
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
as we accept our powerlessness over others, we become empowered personally. So all of these things is, a wonderful journey to take the person through. And I'm doing it right now with guys in Glasgow, and it's working a treat.
I'm
Really good.
delighted to hear it, Lynn, because as you say, this is such a massive problem in every country, in every culture, in every education level and income bracket.
Yeah.
Most perpetrators are never referred by any court and don't actually access programs like this. But many families and many women, many children are impacted, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to ask you about, and I love this concept, is about relational health, which Bruce Perry and co-writer Ludie Dobson describe as the nature, number, and quality of positive relationships in a person's life. Do you think in our approach to rearing boys in the Western world, but also beyond, in other cultures too, do you feel that we kind of elevate the relational, the social, and the emotional side of life enough in order to kind of build safe, healthy, respectful, loving, and emotionally literate men? It's a long question, but basically, are we rearing our boys right, or are we doing something wrong?
I think that's the wonderful, beautiful picture that you've painted there is what we should always, that's the bar we should all be trying to reach.
Mm.
And if we do, and we were to put campaigns out just on that alone, and have that as a household picture and household words, and if we're continually exposed to that picture, I think more people would start really, adopting that.
Mm.
And that would be the case. And I think we are on a road to recovery with that more now than we were 10, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still much more to be done. We're still fighting toxic masculinity. It's everywhere, yeah, and films and all of that. And so we're trying to strike a balance, aren't we? We're bringing in females who are badass as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then that gives the girls the message that they have
Yeah.
to be like that too. and as I was teaching young teenage girls from a children's home just a few weeks ago on sexual harassment, I was told, "You don't need to tell me any of this. I know all of this."
Right.
To find something that they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so it's coming through girls, it's coming through boys. It's this kind of masculine energy that not only boys have got it in a toxic way, but women have got too much masculine energy and forgetting about that they're scared to be feminine at times.
Right. Mm.
They may look feminine, but they're operating too much in their masculine energy, and then boys wouldn't even associate with feminine. So that's creating that toxic masculinity. So it's the picture, it's the message, and it's education that's needed to really get into school policy making everywhere.
I love that point actually about the masculine versus feminine energy, and that we all have both actually within us, and
we do.
the masculine energy can help protect us at times, or have us have those fight responses maybe, or whatever. But boys and men do also have a nurturing feminine energy, and a vulnerability and an emotional fragility that we need to allow them to embrace. And girls shouldn't feel shamed for having emotions either, or want to be soft. So it's a really important point in the modern world that it's a blending and using each in its turn. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about, Lynn, because we met at the latest Ace Aware Nation conference in Scotland. We were sitting next to each other, which was very nice, towards
that
the
was
front.
Meant to be.
Yeah, at Fritzie Horseman's Compassionate Prisons vision.
Yeah.
And it was certainly very, very interesting. Have you been a part of this kind of Ace Aware Nation movement for a while now?
I've been aware of it, and more so wanting to be part of it and willing to be more involved in any way that anyone wants me to, just in the last year,
Okay.
because I walked away from, shall we say, a toxic sort of feminism, that I
Okay.
didn't realize I was part of until I was in lockdown, and in a bubble with all of that. And that was where they were all fighting each other and fighting everyone else. And it was done in the wrong spirit. It wasn't
Right.
done in a healthy way at all. And it was just coming from the wrong angle. And I realized I was caught up in all of that. And I took myself out of it and realized there was this beautiful ACE aware nation that had tried to reach me 4 or 5 years ago,
Oh,
when
wow.
had a conference, and those beautiful people from Tigers
Mm.
came to my conference at that time, and they asked me to speak, I think, at the conference they did, where Gabor Mate was speaking, and I couldn't because I was in Spain at the time.
Okay,
So
wow.
a very big regret there
I'd
for
say
me.
so. Another time, Lynn, another time, hopefully. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when I was able to put all that toxic stuff aside and look at this beautiful recovery, awareness, adverse childhood experiences, all of that, I realized this is my tribe. This
Mm.
is where I want to be.
Mm.
And just now, every Thursday, I go to an organisation called Men Matter Scotland, and they are an ACE aware organisation. They assess every man that comes through the doors. They've got about 1,500 guys in their book, and they've got about 200 to 300 men come through their door every week in Drumchapel
Tremendous.
in Glasgow who are affected by ACEs,
Mm.
and they assess through the ACEs. They are happy with my work and that it's in line with the
Yeah.
ACEs movement. And so, yes, it's something that I'm embracing with all I am
Yeah.
now, and it's wonderful.
Thanks, Lynn. And I find that very interesting as well, that we sometimes forget that grown men start as babies and then are tiny, vulnerable boys, so
Yeah,
it's not like they are born to be an abuser or a violent man towards women and girls. They learn, as you say, they learn it somehow, most of
yeah,
them anyway. And so to try and break the cycle for future generations, so important to help men
yeah,
understand themselves and give them a sense, I guess, a sense of a bit of control over their own impulses that they've maybe been
absolutely.
lacking. One thing on the ACEs as well, and I'm just wondering whether you found this, but Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who spoke a few years ago at the ACE Aware Nation conference, she set up the Center for Youth Wellness in California, and through routine screening of children for ACEs, they found that kids who had 4 or more of them were more likely, they were 32 times more likely, in fact, to have ADHD or something like oppositional defiance disorder than kids with no ACEs. Do you think that teachers need to understand
Oh, yeah,
ACEs and how things
absolutely.
like trauma caused by domestic violence, perpetrated largely, but not always just by men, that they need to understand how this might play out in the classroom?
They do, and this needs to be a large part of their curriculum as they learn to become teachers. Anyone, who's working with children and adults, is working with people,
Mm.
need to know this thing. I was that child at 10 years of age that went into my primary school because 3 years before Dad killed Mum, she one evening during the night she came bursting into mine and my sister's bedroom, and she flung herself over my legs on the single bed, and my dad was holding her down by the throat with one hand and had an axe
Oh,
above her skull with the other hand. So it looked like he was going to put that in her skull there and then. And I think he stopped because myself and my sister were screaming and begging him not to. And she got out of it, they went out the room. And so I went to school that day, and I think I must have been in a daze. I can't even remember. All I remember was going to the teacher very, very quietly so that none of my pupils would hear me. And I said to her, what happened that night? And I said, I knew by going to tell her that we probably would get taken away, but I wanted to be taken away because it was too terrifying now to watch.
Wow. Okay.
It was too terrifying. And I couldn't tell family in Glasgow. We were in Aberdeen at the time because Mum made me feel that I couldn't.
Yeah.
The guilt and the shame and the secrecy. And the teacher looked me up and down, and I was well kept. Me and my sister had a lovely home. Mum and Dad worked, home cooked food. You know, we were well kept, very, very well groomed, and no
The
one would have ever
optics
known.
were good.
Yeah, no one would have ever known we were
Yeah.
victims of domestic violence. She looked me up and down and she said, come and see me at 3 o'clock. And I went to see her and she wasn't there. I thought I got the wrong
What?
classroom. I went into all the classrooms. I thought maybe I got it wrong. I waited for about half an hour and she wasn't there. And she avoided me after then. Now we're talking
Horrific.
1980, perhaps.
She didn't want to
1980.
know. She didn't know what to do with it. She couldn't cope with the information. Wow.
Yeah, and for years I've grappled with that memory, with feelings about her, and I've let that go now because I've done my good recovery work on myself. So,
Yeah.
and that doesn't represent every teacher.
No.
Of course, there are wonderful teachers out there, but I want to go in and I want to do what I can do at one point once I've got a team built up again to work and do all the work I'm doing with the guys. And
Yeah.
I'm also still working with women. So once we've got that organised, then I would like to, well, I have been training professionals through the other programme that I was doing during Zoom, during lockdown. Had the fortunate experience of actually training a lot of professionals already. And when I tell my childhood story to social workers, teachers, police, and nurses and all that, they say that was the most impactful story and they needed to hear it. They needed to hear it. So it's not a blame, not here to blame, but that was my experience. And yes, I believe that there are a lot of things missed, just maybe because the child doesn't look unkempt.
Yes.
And stuff. So yes, more and more, please, more awareness, more education to the educated.
But the shocking thing as well there for me, and yet it's not shocking at all, is that you found the words, you asked for help, and you were abysmally failed. And okay, she would, like, I know we've mandated reporting now, and actually I don't think in some ways anything has really changed. People would still not want to hear a story like that, Lynn, because it is so horrific and shocking and upsetting. And yet, how can we leave children in that position, if we have the power to do something? So education is critical.
It is absolutely critical. And children's voices and being heard. And it did take me so much. Thank you for noticing that and feeling that with me, because as soon as she looked at me or she didn't turn up, I immediately went into, I shouldn't have said anything. I know I shouldn't have said anything. I was wrong to say. I really should just shut my mouth. Guilt, shame, and I went even more into myself because of it. And
how
that was
could
the
you
impact.
not? Yeah, and then you think it would take a really long time before, if I were in your shoes, I would ever ask for help again or trust an adult to do what they'd say they'd do as well,
Absolutely.
Yeah, like that's a key message, I think. Do not say you'll do something if you will not do it, because the expectations get formed around adults being untrustworthy, emotionally whatever, unstable themselves, and that you can't trust anyone in the world to help you. So but I can imagine how hearing aspects of your story and what did or did not work along the way would just make people go, oh, if that happened to me, how might I respond? And I'm sure you give people ideas for how they might better respond than that. For
Yeah.
example, like turn
Yeah.
up if you say you're going to, and at least be there for the child, even if nothing else happens after that. Believe them and be kind.
Yeah.
So Lynn, one thing that struck me as well there when you were talking about the toxic feminism is that sometimes on some online platforms in particular, you'd get the impression that male violence never has any link to female violence, or that women can be violent too. And oftentimes women are violent towards their children. And I just wonder, like they can be physically, but also emotionally and verbally, psychologically abusive to children. So I'm just wondering, does that sometimes come up in the courses, that it wasn't so much domestic violence perpetrated by a male, but abuse perpetrated by their mothers or their caregivers?
Yes. I'm going to tell you that the effect that all of that had on me was that I was lacking in self-esteem as a mother.
Okay.
I coped very well, but then I had a husband that wasn't so great in his behaviour towards me.
Okay.
I don't go public with that as such, but you know, it's part of it and it has happened. And so when the children, when we split, the children were 6 and 8. And then for them, that was traumatic. And then the divorce was very traumatic 3 years later, the breakup and the divorce. So their behaviour was different from just being a normal teenager. And I couldn't cope. I didn't cope at times. There was times where I thought, I don't want to be a mother. Now, my admittance and also my story of the impact that everything in my life has had on my ability to be a mother, and me saying this to women in the group has really set them free to be able to be honest themselves and say that they experienced what I think is called reactive abuse, where we can react. Now, there's a Professor Evan Stark has written a book on coercive control.
Right.
Very interesting. And in there, he talks about the effects of abuse on the parent, the mother, being able to function as a mother, because she's supposed to be nurtured to nurture.
Yes.
The psychological, it's a physical thing, isn't it? It's a biological thing. So when mother isn't nurtured to nurture, there's a broken chain. It's like a broken part of the chain. And that can result in mum being abusive to children when they're just being normal children, when they're just being normal teenagers. She can't cope because of her trauma. So there's all those trauma responses that's mixed in with motherhood and what's happened to mother for her to feel that she can't respond appropriately to the children just being children. I have worked with women who, yes, they've had all these experiences themselves, and they're now beating up and abusing their male partners who don't do or say anything, and the male partner is the victim. And she's come on to me as a perpetrator, and she just come on to the same group as the women victims, and she just listens to the information and she'll apply that to her own circumstance. Yeah, so it's like you can get in a person, you can have them as the victim and perpetrator, and that's the same in men too.
Yes.
And it's more common than what the big organizations want to admit.
Yeah.
And they'll just split everyone off and say, no, women are in this camp, men are in that camp, one's a victim, one's a perpetrator. Don't really want to admit that there's male victims out there that are genuine victims and all the rest of it. So I find that all too black and white and too political, because working with people, men and women, as you said at the beginning of our call, it's not the big picture. It's
Mm,
not just black and white. It's colourful, and we've all got all these different traumas and experiences mixed in.
mm.
And so, yeah, we tend to categorize very well, don't we?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, it is the black and white thinking, which is also a trauma response, and it
absolutely.
can be
Yeah,
partly, though, I suppose, as well, a funding issue that you want to just work with this category of person. But if
yeah,
you truly want to break the cycle of violence, you need to understand the complexities and that there can be
absolutely.
victim perpetrators. And, as well, I've heard of organizations like rape crisis organizations being sometimes abusive in their own practices with people coming to access services. So like that's
Absolutely.
the whole thing about being trauma informed and responsive, is checking our own behavior and being aware of when we become activated, noticing how important it is. What are we feeling in our bodies when someone says something to us or behaves in a particular way, and taking a breather if we need it before we say or do something destructive.
Can I just say, just on that note with services, is that as I became a service, I'm still a survivor of
Mhm.
horrendous abuse from childhood to adulthood, and all different settings in between, not just interpersonal relationships. But when I went in and negotiated with some organisations, tried to co-work with them and collaborate with them, I was treated with terrible behaviour towards me as an organisation. Who are you? Who do you think you are? And you're just going to disappear eventually. We know
Wow.
you'll go eventually, and we don't agree with what you're doing, and you don't know what you're doing. And so, yeah, that was also very traumatic, and
Of
it
course it
continues,
was.
it does
Of course.
continue,
Yeah.
and it's nearly taken me out of helping others because of that. And I must say, there are some services also, I've got to say this, who are also abused by some, and they don't like to say this, but some participants
Sure.
are also, they've presented as victims, and they've came through, and they have done really well, and they've recovered, and then they get kind of well, I want to be where you are. And so when you put boundaries up because of their behavior, they then accuse you of being an abuser. So
Right.
this is quite common to services from participants.
Mm.
So it goes both ways as well, and I've written about this in my new course.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's just so complicated, really, I
It
suppose,
is.
healing and recovery, and people relapse badly, clearly, in
Yeah,
moments. And
yeah,
yeah, so
lots of
not being aware of traumatic reenactment and repetition compulsion, and the ego, wanting recognition and all of that.
yeah,
We have to be constantly mindful and forgiving, as you were saying, but there are some
lots
things
of
at the
grace is
same
needed.
time that are harder to forgive, and
Yeah,
some people, yeah, boundaries are very important. Um, my final question, Lynn, then, is one I ask everyone really: what would you like to see politicians and policymakers do to promote safe, healthy childhoods and connected childhoods for every child, so that we
yeah,
also have healthier adults over the life course?
yeah. It's to implement the ACE awareness study into all all education, all areas of anyone dealing with children from the first, nursery, all the way through to going to universities, and becoming adults, and what they do in life. It has to be there in hospitals, everywhere where people need to be aware, where they're at the receiving end maybe of someone's trauma, and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. Is
Mm.
that a trauma response? We really need this information out there so much more than it is. And for the policies to reflect that, not just to look good.
Yeah.
Policies can look good, but do they actually work? Is that actually happening? And don't just look at the big organisations and think, well, they're giving us a yearly report, so everything must be good.
Yeah.
Come to the small organisations like ourselves.
Mm.
We're working on the ground and struggling for funding
Mm.
and recognition and collaboration
Mm.
at times. proper collaboration and relationship with other organisations because we're different.
Mm.
Come and ask us and find out what we're doing. You know, if there's social enterprises, they're registered in Companies House.
Mm.
So it's easy to find us,
Yeah.
you know, in a city, and see what policies and procedures we're implementing. See what, you know, my clients make my service, they mold my service and how it works. I don't come to them and say, this is what we're going to do. They show me
Okay.
what they need,
Yeah.
and my services are formed by their needs.
Mm.
And it's always trauma needs. In the Men Matters on a Thursday, they call me the trauma woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've
You could
never
be
been
called
called
worse
anything
things.
nicer.
Yeah. Yeah. I get you.
I say to them, I say, thank you guys for accepting me as much as you're thanking me. And they say, oh no, we're not quite there yet, Hen. We're getting there though. We'll let you know when we are.
Yeah.
And so we have lots of laughs around it. And because of
So
that, the
important.
atmosphere is so, adopt an atmosphere of inclusion and relaxation and non-judgment. The main key things the guys are saying is because they're not judged and they're understood, they're willing to open up and say, I did that.
Mm.
I've done this. And by the way, I've got victims and I've got guys who didn't even know they were perpetrating in the same room.
Mm.
And we're doing okay. There's a big fear around that. It's different perpetrator coming from court and mandated and all that. Of course, that's different.
Mm.
But we just get men with mental health coming through the door with trauma, and then they're being able to place the abuse education, awareness, and recovery into their life to make it fit their own recovery. And that's our approach. I think you've mentioned about approach.
Mm.
And I find that this approach is working really, really well. Yeah, and it's being well received.
It sounds really remarkable. I mean, just from what you shared with me, and you shared it with me the first day, you know, about your dad and your mom and all of that, coming from that history to being able to be so safe and heart-centered and non-judgmental is truly remarkable, you know. It's, and I'm sure it must be hard hearing certain things at times, but the only way forward is probably to dispense with the shame and blame, really, and try and help.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's to know, you know, when I stand in front of any man that needs support, I'm representing my father. And when I stand in front of any woman that needs support, I'm representing my mother. And then a couple of teenagers the other week, it was like, wow, there's me standing there now for a change.
Amazing, Lynn, it really is. And so many of the survivors I've spoken to who get into kind of helping roles, you know, it is very much about pulling something positive out of the kind of the wreckage of the past in ways, and doing it for the little child that they once were as well.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. It's giving back. And in recovery, they say you've got to give it back to keep it.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's so true, you know. And so I've got this No Fear to Community Interest company where it's targeted funding or donations, and I can go out into the community, or we can go out into the community and we can give free abuse awareness and abuse recovery courses to whoever, whatever organisation or whatever person needs them. If they want to do it, it's pre-recorded online, and also we can work with organisations to deliver within where people are already engaging. That's really quite useful. Because in a week, nobody really wants to go to all these different groups. If they can go to one place and actually get loads of stuff in one day, sometimes it takes people half a day to get out or a week to get out of the front door. If they can go to one place and get everything in one place,
the
especially with mental health
kind of thing.
That seems to be the thing that's good. But if they miss any of the sessions because of their health, they email me, they say, Lynn, can you send me that session? So I'll send them the pre-recorded session so that they'll get that. And that's the free work that No Fear does. But then on the other side, I've got men coming from a doctor, someone high up in the army who just want to, they can't really be revealed. They've got to work on this in their own time. according to their schedules. So they can pay for it on, I've got a limited company called Manspace. I'm just setting that up and that's there. And they pay for it online. They download it. They do all the worksheets and the quizzes. And sometimes social workers will contact us and say, can I get a report from that guy? How did he interact? Well, he did, because he filled out all the worksheets and all the quizzes and stuff. And he phoned me a couple of times. And so, yeah, I've checked in with him. He's doing okay. He completed the course and that's it. And he wanted to pay for it and just do it on his own. So it's just a case of people linking in. And then women come back to me. They're coming back to me after 15 years. Oh, I'm a bit stuck. I'm in another relationship. What have you got for me? If you get another course, right? Okay. So I've put, and I go for lunch with them now and stuff like that as well. Still in touch with them all. It's great fun. And so I've set up a little subscription service for women to continually connect with each other on a forum and do courses online and stuff. And if they want a little Zoom, that's there, they can do that. And that's on a little platform, a limited company platform, lynnharris.com. So both limited companies, 10% of their takings all go in as a donation to No Fear to give the community free work. And then that's good. It's how it all works.
And do you have any state funding, Lynn?
At the moment, no.
Shocking.
I've applied to the lottery again. So we have an application into the big lottery. They have funded us for 5 years. I'm so grateful to them for that. And so we've put another one in for this new project with men, to reach men, and hopefully that will come through for another 3 years. But I'm talking to Pam Gozal, who is putting through the proposed domestic abuse Prevention Scotland Bill, which is a domestic abuse register for repeat offenders, perpetrators to be registered. Not only will this be a registration for them, it will also be where they will be flagged up and rehabilitated and offer rehabilitation as well. So I think that's going to be a really great opportunity. So I'm saying yes, I think it's definitely needed, but not in a punishing way.
No, I get you.
Bring about a rehabilitation and you'll win better, with that. So yeah.
You would think, that you would think that you should be able to attract funding from like prevention and early, like from the child angle, as well as the Department of Justice kind of responding to this scourge of that causes such ill health. But also preventing harm to children, because they do have the Scottish ACEs whole of government approach, so I would think that people should see merit in this. One thing I'd wanted to ask you as well, Lynn, and I'm sorry for holding you, during my PhD, which was on long sentence male prisoners, I was in Scotland multiple times and visited various prisons, and also Norway. And in various conversations, the matter of domestic abuse came up as a kind of, what do we do with this in prison? It's on the increase. We're getting more convictions, more men doing time for this. What can we do? What programs can we do with them? Are you offering your programs in any prisons, or would you like to?
I would like to. I spoke with the governor of Stockton. Actually, my father was put there in 1983, and also spoke with the leader in Barlinnie, because there's a bigger story with my grandfather connected to Barlinnie as well. So there's a huge big story here. I really need to write a book at some point.
I think you do.
I think I do. So yeah, they said, yes, there's nothing that's effective there. Would you like to come in? So that's where, and it's great because I've been piloting with the guys in Men Matters, and a lot of them have came out of prison. And also Men Matters has just went into Berlin, and they're going to set up a recovery cafe in there.
Oh, brilliant.
And they said, would you like to come in with us? So the beauty of this collaboration with this organisation, they have totally adopted me. Don't want to let me go, and they're like, we want you to come with
it's amazing
us, we want you to be part of this. I've never been treated so amazingly by any organisation. I also incidentally work with I'm going to do some work with restorative justice. Thriving Survivors in Glasgow. They do restorative justice with a lot of victims and perpetrators. I think it's of different crimes. They are moving into the domestic abuse side of things, and they want to do so very, very cautiously. and consult, of course, with domestic abuse organisations. So they're asking me to work with them on that. And also there's a wonderful organisation called AMIS, which work with victims, male victims of domestic abuse. So there are some wonderful organisations, and I think this is the key, where we do it together,
Yeah.
and make sure that one person's journey is that they're getting passed on to the right people, the right organisations that all hold this ACEs awareness, trauma awareness, and approach. The approach is everything.
Yeah.
5 seconds you get, and a person will decide if you're just ticking a box or you're there because you care.
That's true. And that's the relational side of things, that really the ACE Aware Nation movement is not all about just ACEs and box ticking. It is so much about the relational side of things, the fostering connection and helping people heal and have safe, loving relationships like they deserve, because everyone deserves that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what it's about. Sorry, I've got a pup that just appeared in the room and now chewing my nail.
No problem. No problem. I've taken a heap of your time anyway, Lynn. Hi, puppy.
Okay.
He's saying, come on, bring me out for a walk, or she. So Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights and your amazingly important work.
It's just wonderful to get to chat to you and see you again. And hopefully that there'll be many more ACE awareness events and different things, just to get out there and get that message out there, because it is the best thing that's happened, especially that Scotland is really adopting it. There's still a lot of organisations that are not practicing it.
Yes,
and so I'd like to see more of it. Much more work to be done, but
there is
done together.
Absolutely. Collaboration is key. So Lynn, thank you. This has been Relationship Matters with me, Jane Mulcahy, and the amazing, wonderful, lovely, warm Lynn Harris, who is on a mission to create a safer world. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Jane.